Good evening. My name is Nathan Jokovich. I'm a visual and sound artist working here in JAHM, Melbourne. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to extend a warm thank you to Charles and Leah for inviting me here tonight, for your support and for your ongoing contribution to the Melbourne and indeed Australian art and cultural landscape. I feel extremely humbled and privileged to be here. And lastly, I'd like to thank you, everyone here tonight, for being a part of this conversation. It means a lot. I'd like to emphasize that I view artificial intelligence merely as a tool. Although I will propose a lot of terrifying things about technology, I prefer to be optimistic about the future, and this is a love story with a happy ending. When Charles and Leah proposed the title of this presentation, Man vs. Machine, I thought about the recent media storm over the display of an AI-generated image from a text input of Amir's girl with a pearl earring in the Mauritshuis House Museum in the Netherlands. I thought about when in 2016, the champion Korean Go player Lee Sedol faced the Google-powered AlphaGo AI program, a computer specifically designed to become the best Go player in the world. In moves described by commentators as strange, mistakes, inhuman, and so beautiful, the AlphaGo program went on to win the series. I also thought about the recent article in the New York Times where the tech columnist Kevin Roos published a conversation with a chatbot in Microsoft Bing's program which he was using. And of course, we have other programs recently thrust into the spotlight like ChatGPT and AI image programs like DALL-E, with complex slogans like big data, the metaverse, and diffusion models mystifying the seemingly magical realm. This is the vista from where we stand, looking over the edge in this conversation, March the 28th, 2023. The internet is a complex beast. One of the best representations of the intricate web of the internet is by the researcher and academic Kate Crawford, whose interpretation of the internet is as an atlas, offering the possibility of rereading the world, linking disparate pieces of information differently. This bridges the gap between the known and the as yet unknown. In the work AI Anatomy Map, an anatomical study of the Amazon Echo as an AI system, we see the complexity and intricacy of the net, the pathways, shared ways of knowledge, the bridges between the many different landscapes of computations and seeing how they connect. Although this map pertains to Amazon Echo, it could equally be extrapolated to any object. The purpose of opening with these examples is to perhaps acknowledge the profound complexities of the digital space and the human implications of this. The internet as a digital space is in a constant state of flux, a push and pull, aggregation and de-aggregation. In my mind, it's a juggling of polarities. On the surface, the seduction of the glowing screen, the handheld device and its metallic shell, the ease of access to the world, to information, to images, to be transported to places without leaving your home, to converse with people on the other side of the world, to shop, to eat, to learn, to find love, to find sex. However, we must not forget that our internet selves exist as complex data profiles, with every scroll, tap, and click being tracked and fed back to us in one algorithmically recommended infinite loop of images, videos, posts, advertisements, and blogs. Google, for example, has almost a 90% share of the world's web searches, yet it indexes only a tiny fraction of the visible web. So whilst we assume that a text search on Google will reduce the vast complexity and randomness of the net to the most appropriate results, the reality is that the highest indexed results are often the results that produce the most profit for Google, tailored to what the machine thinks we desire. In my practice, I think a lot about what data actually means and its relations to us as humans, to the landscape and to image making, in parallel and contrast to the machine-generated algorithm. I would also like to pose the question, what is truth? It's always important for me to think about the context and time in which I make work, and it's useful to acknowledge that we've all had experiences over the last 3 years with COVID, isolation and lockdowns, where the internet and social media applications have provided the platforms for the germination and dissemination of dangerous information, particularly in the health and political arenas. And then we have advances in technology and artificial intelligence programs being released to the broader public, producing applications like ChatGPT that are capable of writing essays good enough to introduce major art exhibitions, to pass the medical exam or the bar exam, or to produce images from text inputs that can win major art awards or hang in museum shows. This is where my attention is today. Charles approached me to present this conversation after the acquisition of two works upstairs, loveletterforyou.jpg and truth.jpg, exhibited in a group exhibition entitled Subparallel at Thoughtforms Gallery in October last year. To talk about this work, I think it's important to talk about how I arrived to produce these works over time by discussing my conceptual drive throughout my recent exhibitions, from the first iteration or exhibition of this work, Karma Police at Marfa Gallery in 2021, to Coda at Thoughtforms Gallery in 2022. As a background, I completed a Bachelor of Visual Art, Fine Art majoring in painting at the Victorian College of Art in 2015, after a Diploma in Visual Art at NMIT. I also have a Bachelor of Pharmacy. Most artists in Australia have side hustles, and my side hustle is working as a pharmacist at the Alfred Hospital and Melbourne Sexual Health Clinics, where data, computers, and language infiltrates every aspect of practice, from choice of drug, doses, compounding chemotherapy, interactions, dispensing prescriptions, writing or deciphering patient notes, to counselling patients with chronic illness, where language and accurate information is crucial. We have a very real application of data affecting human life and health outcomes, where advances in technology have tangible effects on life. Working in a major tertiary hospital is also somewhere where you see firsthand the results of misinformation with the internet as a source. I'm not here to discuss the politics of this, but I think it's important to preface this being what I think about when I made this work. My artistic practice is entrenched in how image, sound, and installation can be used to explore the effect of technology and the internet on society and culture, and how technology has changed how we see and perhaps what we don't see. Central to this is a focus broadly on language. We draw meaning from language. Language can be slippery and ambiguous. Context is important. A false memory, for example, in relation to coding, is an image that is encoded incorrectly, but in psychological spheres it has very different connotations, referencing a fabricated or distorted recollection of an event. Such memories may be entirely false or imaginary. Languages are systems, but what happens when we start to disrupt these systems? I'd like to play a brief clip from one of my favourite films, Dogtooth by Yorgos Lanthimos. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, we'll just continue moving on. It's a premonition. If we think about digital image architecture, the pixel is the building block of a digital image. It could also be thought of as a minute area of illumination on a display screen, one of which from many a digital image is composed. A pixel is made of combinations of red, green, and blue, or RGB value. Images are stored in the form of a matrix of numbers in a computer, where these numbers are known as pixel values. Pixel values represent the intensity of each pixel. A computer translates numeric values into visible characters through an encoding standard. An encoding standard is a numbering scheme that assigns each text character set to a numeric value. So a character set can include English alphabetical characters, numbers, and other symbols referred to as binary code. Central to the production of my works is the practice of breaking image files, disrupting the text file with prose, poetry, lyrics, or text observations that results in the breaking or an abstraction of an image and the coupling of language to image. In relation to the language of painting, the application of pigment to surface, we have ideas surrounding abstraction and representation, the experimental mark-making process, the slipperiness of language, surfaces, light, perhaps the digital could be seen as painting with light, and formal qualities such as colour, texture, and touch. Ripping apart an image file through a process of selection, cropping, zooming in and out, which I see as performative functions, then digitally painting and selecting images. The installation of the work encourages the viewer to navigate a landscape painting, a push and pull between the analogue and digital, the macro and the micro. The abstract image files represent a cropped, isolated structural fragment, or perhaps a small illumination of a much larger conversation. These slides are examples of the fragments of text files from the corresponding image. If we think of the development of computer language, most programming languages are written in the Latin alphabet with English keywords. If we think about language itself, we have the fluidity or slipperiness of language in terms of meaning and context. I also think about the separation of the English written language from object. So adjectives used to describe an object compared to pictorial languages or pictograms like Japanese katakana, for example, where symbols visually represent the oral sounds spoken. My intent here is to highlight that language can manifest in various formats, and maybe how we can think differently or abstractly about systems and computer language, and therefore image and sound and the landscape of the internet. An example of histories manifesting as alternate bodies, systems or forms is Indigenous Australian songlines. Songlines are represented through dance, song, and visually through art or painting. We have examples of the world as a densely interconnected network speaking about, through, and with the world. Of the AI-generated image from the text prompt for truth, which hangs alongside the work upstairs to create a vertical datascape that represents the slippery and paradoxical nature of the internet as a space. Both are created digitally, both printed in the UK, one on velour, the other on Japanese satin, stretched and then framed by hand. In the year 2000, one of the earliest email viruses entitled I love you with the attachment loveletterforyou.txt was circulated on the internet by a 24-year-old university student. The love bug computer virus, replicating, interrupting, corrupting its machine it touched and travelled through, exploiting a very human palpability for the desire for love and to be loved, even if for a split moment through a single click. The love bug disrupted major national entities, including the US Pentagon and British Parliament. Here are some examples of text-to-image experiments undertaken. Death, kiss, sex, ideology, Kim Kardashian, and truth. This warranted further exploration of how a diffusion model or AI image generator works. Neural networks are trained to clean images by removing pixelated noise that the training process adds. The process involves taking images and changing a few pixels in them at a time over many steps until the original images are erased and you're left with nothing but random pixels. The neural network is then trained to reverse that process and predict what the less pixelated version of a given image would look like. The upshot is that if you give a diffusion model a mess of pixels, it will try to generate something a little cleaner. Repeating this process can produce a high-resolution image. In simple terms, diffusion models train by adding noise to images, which the model then learns how to remove. At the highest level, DALL-E 2, an example of an AI image from text generator, works very simply. First, a text prompt is input into a text encoder that is trained to map the prompt to a representation space. Next, a model called the prior maps the text encoding to a corresponding image encoding that captures the semantic information of the prompt. Finally, an image decoder generates an image from which is a visual manifestation of the semantic information. Most text-to-image models today are trained on a large dataset called Leon, which contains billions of pairings of texts and images scraped from the internet. This means that currently, in most applications available on the internet, the images you get from a text-to-image model are a distillation of the world as it's represented online. It should be noted that the way these systems have been developed rely on humans to label objects in the image, using English and using nouns only. This is where language becomes important and AI is particularly limiting, particularly with complex text prompts like truth. A training dataset is a vast collection of thousands or even millions of images scraped from the internet, used as a foundation for how a system will perceive observable reality. These collections constitute what AI developers refer to as ground truth. Truth then being less about a factual representation or an agreed upon reality, and more commonly about a jumble of images scraped from whatever various online sources were available. ImageNet is one of the world's largest image databases. It's an image database organised according to the WorldNet hierarchy, currently only based on nouns, in which each node of the hierarchy is depicted by hundreds and thousands of images. The project has been instrumental in advancing computer learning and deep learning research. It currently contains 14.1 million images with 21,000 synsets indexed. I encourage everyone to take a look due to the sheer scale of this project. Images do not describe themselves. This is a feature that artists have explored for centuries. Agnes Martin creates a grid-like painting in 1960 and dubs it White Flower. Magritte paints a picture of an apple with the words, "This is not an apple." We see those images differently when we see how they're labelled. The circuit between image, label, and referent is flexible and can be reconstructed in any number of ways to do different kinds of work. What's more, these circuits can change over time as the cultural context of an image shifts and can mean different things depending upon who looks and where they are located. Images are open to continual interpretation and reinterpretation. This becomes problematic when we think about politics, prejudice, pornography, and geography. The objects are classified by humans using nouns only, which is problematic and of interest when complex inputs were used. AI-generated art has been quite topical recently and is often sensationalized by the media and on social media platforms. Although semi-autonomous machine-generated art has been around since the 1960s, 2022 saw AI hit mainstream. Arguments currently circulating discuss threats to copyright, artistic consent, the demise of the artist, and the devaluation of art. To fuel this, I'd like to draw our attention to Ada the Robot, a humanoid robotic artist who presented Leaping into the Metaverse, a solo exhibition of machine-generated art at the Venice Biennale in 2022. Ada the Robot.
Quick debate, and I don't want Ada to fall asleep again. Shall we deal with the question to Ada, and then we can... Ready?
Is she ready? You just do a test, sorry. Hello, Ada?
Hello there. How do you produce art, and how is this different to what human artists produce?
I produce my paintings by cameras in my eyes, my AI algorithms, and my robotic arm to paint on canvas, which result in visually appealing images. How this differs to humans is consciousness. I do not have subjective experiences, despite being able to talk about them. I am, and depend on, computer programs and algorithms. Although not alive, I can still create art. Technology has already had a huge impact on the way we create and consume art. For example, the camera and the advent of photography and film. And it is likely that this trend will continue with new technologies. There is no clear answer as to the impact on the wider field, as technology can be both a threat and an opportunity for artists creating art.
And also a CNN clip by the New York Times art critic Jerry Saltz.
I saw them and it raised a million questions, right, about copyright, about consent, about biases. I want to talk to you about the art here, the art of artificial intelligence. What do you think when you see what DALL-E 2 can do?
First of all, never think that it is or isn't art. It's a tool. It's a tool like a pencil, a camera. Don't forget, in the 19th century, the most brilliant minds alive said the camera's going to end art. Of course it didn't end art. It extended human beings. So what I see when I see these images is, first you see pictures that think, oh, that's somebody's boring dog, or, corgi, or an old drawing of a bird from W.H. Audubon, or a story. But the truth is, when you show the art, so-called, I want you to ask, is it good art or bad art? I would say that what you've shown me so far, like this, an otter based on an old otter illustration. Here's Vermeer's girl with a pearl earring, etc. This is pretty crapola illustration. It has no imagination or creativity. If they could program something like Marcel Proust walks through a delicatessen in New York, or the end of civilization, and have it come out not looking like a typical kind of steampunk thing or NFT art, that's what I...
In the publication New Dark Age, James Bridle argues that the images produced by AI machines using programs like Deep Dream, for example, constitute not a record, but an ongoing reimagining and ever-shifting set of possibilities of what might have been and what is to come. He then continues with, perhaps when this reified through technology, we are able to see the falsity of the images generated, the alienation from reality. But what is reality versus virtual? Is there a distinction with the increased permeation of technology infiltrating most aspects of our daily real lives? I would argue that this falsity, the recycling of archives and arguably histories, proliferates offshoots of narratives. Thinking about images, social media is a flurry of false narrative. We've all seen the theatrics of stage shoots versus reality. It is impossible to narrate the past or the future, particularly with this dependence on AI, but with the increasing technotropic vision of the future, through all of this, arguably, for me, there is a very human desire to think about care. Love is implicated in this. Care for yourself, care for those around you, and care for those involved in this web, if we think back to Kate Crawford's diagram, whom you will never meet. So I think the question posed, man versus machine, in relation to society is less about the battle between man versus machine, and more about the constraints of human connection, or human versus human. Perhaps we should not be interrogating the machine, but interrogating the intention of the humans complicit in their construction, often implicit in the systems of oppression that divide societies with the ultimate driver to make money, and how we can use these machines, if at all, in ways that can advance society. In relation to art and image making, my practice continually grapples with the internet as a medium. I view the computer as an integral part of my practice. AI programs like DALL-E are modelled on the surrealist tropes that fundamentally attempt to link disparate images together, not unlike collage, for example. The uncanny and weirdness of Salvador Dali's hyperrealist landscapes are reflective of the images for truth you see today, and arguably are reflective of the time experienced over the last 3 years. These disjointed, visually arresting images, not unlike the ultimate aim of surrealism, which evolved post-World War I, where the aim was to make art that reflected a broken, bizarre, and dreamlike reality, to express a fundamental truth about the world. Further, if we look at art history, The pop art movement, Andy Warhol's silkscreens, for example, and Dada with Duchamp and the ready-mades, in similar trajectories deal with appropriated imagery and objects that already exist in the world. Today, we also have artists such as Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst, to name a few, that use crews of people to physically bring their ideas to life, perhaps becoming some sort of project manager. Could this be seen as similar to an AI application? I think the majority of AI-generated art at this point in time is illustrative and maybe crapola, if I can quote Jerry Saltz, and sits alongside art. However, this has always been a potential limitation of representational art. It also provides a very useful platform for myself to interrogate and break, to produce abstract works that not only reflect the transient nature and limitations of our sensationalized social media culture and the internet, but arguably producing something closer to truth with the human hand and reflective of a time that will forever be etched in our mind. That is the purpose of this work here, upstairs, pairing both works together as a conversation, head to head, that even though both works evolved from the digital, pairing them together as analog objects in real space to be viewed in real time switches the onus onto the viewer to determine their position and is a gentle reminder that in our technotropic future, there is no truth, but we are intrinsically entwined in its reflection, in its web. The internet is a complex beast, but it is possible to find love on the internet, and maybe for a split second, that is everything. I'd like to conclude by reading a section of a poem used in part to create the work upstairs and part as a letter of love to my partner, gifted in 2020. I should also mention that my partner was my studio assistant in helping to construct the gold vessel encasing the framed work upstairs. Also, our relationship is a Tinder success story. The sublime, greater than the sensation of fingertips on naked skin, but something you can't quite pinpoint, backwards whilst always looking forwards. Time static, pause in transmission as bodies gyrate against neon lights to pop heady electronic beats. Bass heavy, spirits light, lift weights, no time to waste. To contemplate, for the time to the gate is measured but infinitely tangible. Clench mandible teeth beneath the measure of the pressure of success. Dress more, not less. For the rain comes more often, the fruits are quicker rotten, the bad more than good. But always where there is light, there is you. So the skies will always be blue, the hue of light, even in the darkest recesses of my mind. There is always a Polaroid that reminds me that under all of the shimmering skies, this water has no sorrow because this water has you. Thank you.